You make this argument that we're wired for interdependence. We're wired for connection in this way, and we often, as your point, we kind of sell. We're in not in those organizations where there's a tight knit community or there's a mutual goal, or there's not even an awareness of a mutual goal, maybe in our everyday life. But we because we often default to self protection in our relationships. And so, why is it so difficult for partners to be aware of or get on board to take care of each other, to have that sense of taking care of each other at the same time? Why is that so difficult?
I think our survival instinct here is the problem. It's everything in nature, including us, our brain, has features, and those same features are bugs in other areas, right? They don't work. For instance, we are good at staying alive, right? That's sort of built in to survive, to not be killed, not be harmed.
Most people think love is enough to make a relationship last. But here's the hard truth. As it turns out, love is not enough. If you and your partner don't have a system for handling conflict, stress, and connection, your relationship is at risk. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Stan Tatkin. He's a renowned couples therapist and author of Wired for Love, which is already out in the second edition, and Each Other's Care. His work reveals something critical for anyone in a relationship to know. And here it is. Relationships aren't just about feelings. They're about agreements. The happiest couples don't just work things out. They plan, predict, and prepare for challenges before they even happen. Here's a few things to look forward to as you continue listening or watching here. Stan's going to break down why your brain is wired to sabotage your relationship and how to rewire it. The biggest myth about love that keeps couples stuck. A simple shift that will instantly reduce conflict and increase intimacy. And one thing every couple needs to do today to improve their relationship. So if you've ever felt stuck in the same arguments, disconnected from your partner, or unsure how to make your relationship feel good for the long term, this episode is going to be great to listen to. Okay, let's get into it. Stan Tatkin, I've obviously been following your work for a really long time. What I love about your work is the integration of how you approach it and with science, but you also make it so practical. So welcome to the Emotional Longevity Podcast.
Thank you, Elisha. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I know at the core of emotional longevity is this idea that we can support emotional health for the long run, and also the impact it has on our physiology and connection in our relationships with other people. I always say is at the epicenter of well-being, and this is really like where you spend your time. Your latest book was Wired for Love, the second edition. Prior to that, and Each Other's Care, and you've been so prolific with so many books, and you take really a bold stance on this idea of the mutual care of relationships. What inspired you to write these books in this area?
Oh gosh, so many things inspired me to do this. My own fear, my own psychology and fearfulness of the world and not relationships so much, but kind of in a sense. And so, when I started to think about the psychobiology of two-person systems, particularly adult romantic attachment systems, that were actually wired more to co-regulate than to just self-regulate. Self-regulation comes out of co-regulation and as infants. And so that I began to think that couple therapy was focusing incorrectly on self-care. We were coming out of a period where John Bradshaw and others coined the term codependency, which is now considered pejorative. And even then, kind of.
I used to work a lot with his work, by the way.
I used to work for him.
There it is.
As an intern, I was working on the ground as a group psychotherapy at the John Bradshaw centers, which are at hospitals. And so I cut my teeth on inpatient work. And so the idea of being able to co-regulate, or that we actually naturally do it up close, suggests that self-regulation, along with our ethos here in the West, that we're self-made people and that, you take care of yourself, I'll take care of myself, I'm mangling the Gestalt prayer, but that actually doesn't work with human primates, that we are actually more close up. We're interactional animals. We don't interact for very long periods. We kind of go nutty. That we are herd animals. We are naturally dependent on each other. We're not lone wolves. And that the way our eyes work up close, I'm able to see what's going on in the other person quicker than I'm able to tell what's going on in me. And if I spend too much on me, then we fall out of tune. Out of attunement. And so that is, from studying babies, this is exactly the case in terms of infant brain development and brain development throughout the lifespan, that everything we really do is up close in the eyes, skin to skin, face to face in the beginning. And hopefully that continues throughout the lifespan. But that's how we actually operate. And so I thought, in terms of this, right, that in each other's care made sense, both from a neurobiological point of view, but also in terms of what has worked throughout the history of us being on the planet as a species. And so that started everything.
Okay. Was there a, and by the way, just for everyone who's listening, the title "In Each Other's Care," and we'll get to this. What Stan is, it really says what he's talking about. Like there's this idea of a mutual, secure, functioning kind of model, which I want you to unpack that for us, because in my view, what happens in relationships is we do have this sense of when we feel like there's a disconnection, there's some uncomfortable thing happening in our life, our brain starts self-referencing quite a bit.
Yeah.
What does it do with me? Am I okay? Like, what's this feeling? How do I get more balanced? And we lose the connection with the other person, and we don't realize that the relationship, the strength of the relationship together, to work to make that the goal, is something that's important. So can you unpack that for us, and then also unpack, was there a personal moment in your life that led to that, like, okay, I want to work on this type of thing?
Well, let me start that last part first.
Okay.
I went through probably the worst experience of my life. I loved my parents, and losing my parents was a big deal. Losing our family home, which I still dream about, by the way, was a big deal. But I was married previously and divorced. And that process of divorce, that whole thing that happened, devastated me. And I found solace, the only solace at that time. I was still a university professor teaching, and my practice. And also what I was learning at the time. I was steeped in neurobiology and steeped in infant attachment and adult attachment. And I really also, because of psychobiology, the autonomic nervous system. And that was key for me, because I believe that was the main agent that took our relationship down. We were not very good at co-regulating certain distress states. And that was the big problem. I didn't know that then. So I wanted to do prevention. I was immensely impressed with the Toronto organization, the Heens Institute, where the Watch, Wait, and Wonder program was. And they were doing prevention. I had long been a mentee of Jim Masterson, and steeped also then in disorders of the self. So the idea of prevention, working with caregivers and infants and starting early to change the trajectory, possible pathogenic trajectory of infants and children, that's what I wanted to do. And so prevention. So I started to work with mother-infant, father-infant pairs, and I could not get enough of people in. I had it all set up and was using digital feedback video, and it was grand, but I couldn't get enough people to buy into this idea of prevention. And so that's when I started turning to the adult attachment pair bonding set. And I found that there was really about a one-to-one agreement with infant attachment study and adult pair bonding studies, except for the matter of symmetry, right? So the adult situation is symmetrical, right? Two adults coming together, hopefully based on terms and conditions, sharing power and authority. And they would have to operate in a manner which is fair, just, and mutually sensitive. So that was the social contract theory part. That was part of this polytheoretical approach called PACT, and social justice theory as it is experienced within that dyad. So we had a top-down ethos, expectation that partners would come together and would organize, structure the purpose of their relationship. Why do they exist? What's the point in them? Where are they going? But also organize in a way that any other free and fair union of equals would do. How are we going to protect each other from each other? In other words, governance. How are we going to deal with the fact that we're two completely different human beings who can be annoying and can be difficult and disappointing, as all human beings are? And how would we do that and still find a way to work effectively together, collaboratively and cooperatively? And also have this agreement or set of agreements that kept us safe and secure, absolutely, in a world that won't.
So, now, are you talking about relationships like partnerships
yes,
between a couple, or is it also relationships between parent-child, or is it just, it's mainly adults? That's what we're...
Parent-child is asymmetric. So that means that the child is just by nature has to adapt to the attachment organization of the caregivers, right? That's one way to look at it. We don't get a choice. We have to adapt to the environment we're born into. And if that environment is distancing, we become more distancing and avoidant. If that environment is clinging and overly dependent, then we give up our autonomy and we become more ambivalent, perhaps. And that's in the insecure spectrum. And so we are what we see, what we experience, what we hear. That's nature repeating itself. And that's the law of nature. It repeats itself, whether we like it or not. And so we're talking about a set of experiences via memory. What happens when I depend on somebody? That's attachment. It's strictly safety and security. It's not about love, but it's often confused with love. It's a glue, nature's glue, a biology that holds us together, whether it's a good idea or not. And we often confuse it as love, but it's actually a very primitive, very existential matter.
Wow, that's such an important point. So for people to listen to. So our history and our experience with safety and security growing up creates we internalize that.
Yeah.
And if it's like I'm feeling dependent or I'm feeling insecure, we internalize that, and that somehow shapes the way we interact in our adult relationships.
Yes. And since I'm very concerned with the matter of threat detection, threat memory, which is basically our survival instinct writ large in terms of how we operate subcortically, that we're easily threatened. And if I'm insecure, let's say I'm a distancer, I don't even realize it because if I didn't have something, I wouldn't know what's missing. I'm naturally defending against losing my autonomy if I'm insecure. I'm afraid that my wings will be clipped. I'll be trapped. I'll feel engulfed. Then I will protect myself in a manner that is threatening to my other partner, right? They don't know me. They don't know why I'm doing this. I don't even maybe know why. And so that becomes a problem interpersonally, but only in dependent type of relationships like romantic relationships, right? And that's when I start to protect myself from what I know will happen. If I am somebody who is sensitive to abandonment, which even distancing people are, they just don't know it, then I would defend myself from fears that I will be rejected or that you won't love me. You won't find me attractive anymore. I don't even know whether you want me. And so I'm constantly testing the waters and I'm constantly pushing and pulling you because I'm afraid. I know you will reject me. And so I behave in a way that's threatening to you. You don't know who I am. You don't understand why I'm doing this. You're reacting like anybody else would, right? And so therein lies, kind of a built-in loop that people could get into if they don't know each other, if they don't know the animal they picked, right? They'll misinterpret everything, as we all do, based on behavior, based on how the person is acting. And if they're acting in a way that's threatening, even small t, then I'm going to respond and remember, and that will accrue if there's no repair.
I got so. For example, I have a couple questions for you. Does a couple, let's say a couple is feeling kind of disconnected, or they fall into these disconnected states?
Yeah.
Do they have to know their attachment styles from the time they were young, or so a lot of people, probably a majority of people, are not self-aware of that, and because they haven't done that work or understand it in that frame. But do they have to know their own and their partners to be able to begin to do the work of becoming more secure together?
Let's take security out. Let's take attachment
That's
out.
okay.
We're still a pain in the ass species.
You
Um,
say that in your book, so I like that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, these are overlays that make us perhaps a little more difficult, but very predictable, at least very predictable. So if we were to take this off the table and we had a shared purpose, you and I, and a shared vision of where we were going, maybe our lives depend on it. These ideas, these problems would flatten out because we are operating in terms of where we are the same and where we agree. That's humans, right? The enemy of thy enemy is thy friend until they're no longer my enemy, right? We're good. And our differences are flattened out. We don't care as much for now because we have a similar sense of purpose. We want to survive, right? And a vision, right? We come out of this alive. That pulls us together. We join a band, a rock and roll band, right? What's the purpose? To play rock and roll and to have fun. And what's the vision? To get a record deal and to be successful. That's why we're all on board. Otherwise, we may not get along. We may not start to find where we disagree and where we are different, which is part of our DNA as human primates. We otherize.
Mm-hmm.
As Yuval Harari brilliantly said, too familiar to ignore, too different to live with. And that's sadly how we operate. We otherize. And so that's a problem even in love relationships and families, right? My kid is so different, I can't live with them. I otherize them. I don't understand. I don't care to understand. To your point about knowing thyself, I don't think people naturally do that. I think, based on my own experience, but also my reading, that only when we suffer do we care about looking inward and understanding ourselves. I don't think the average person cares. And I understand why. We're energy conserved animals and we do the least amount necessary. Why do I have time to look back at my childhood? Who cares? That's how nature repeats itself, by the way. Unquestioned, right? I don't question how I think. I'm still that person that grew up in that family culture. I didn't differentiate from it. Why would I have to? And so I think suffering is what makes us go inside. But people have been doing secure functioning type of relationships, not just love relationships, friendships, military, you could think of, special forces. The ethos there is you're not important. The person to your left and right is more important than you because they'll save your life. It's a different way of thinking, orienting, and people get very close. Mm-hmm. Cop car partners, people who have the same things to gain and the same things to lose, tend to focus more on what their purpose is and what they're trying to achieve than their differences. And as soon as that stops, that's when people start to nitpick. That's when civil war starts, actually, in countries.
But you make this argument that we're wired for interdependence. We're wired for connection in this way, and we often, as your point, we kind of we're in not in those organizations where there's a tight knit community or there's a mutual goal, or there's not even an awareness of a mutual goal maybe in our everyday life. But we because we often default to self protection in our relationships.
Yeah.
And so why is it so difficult for partners to be aware of or get on board to take care of each other, to have that sense of taking care of each other at the same time? Why is that so difficult?
I think our survival instinct here is the problem. Everything in nature, including us, our brain, has features, and those same features are bugs in other areas. They don't work. So, for instance, we are good at staying alive. That's sort of built in to survive, to not be killed, not be harmed. And that carries forward through all the senses. And because we're memory animals, everything mostly we do is by memory. Very little is using critical thinking because it's too energy expending. So we're walking around being automatic, operating by memory, doing what we know, doing what we experience. And as soon as our heart rates go up to a certain level, blood pressure goes up, there is a neurochemical change, there's a brain change where we stop being pro relationship and start being only pro self. Everyone will do it. You will do it. I will do it. There's a threshold by which we will do that. And there is our self-protection where we become pro-self only. In secure functioning, we're hoping to get people to be pro-self and pro-relationship simultaneously, even under stress, which is a hard get. You have to know these systems to hack them and to override them. Otherwise, we will all do what we all do, and that is whatever we feel like it if the conditions are such, right?
Well, to say that, because you said we have to know the systems in
Yes.
order to hack them. So that's like that reminds me of the important idea or experience of being able to recognize
Yes.
things. So, but you're and when we're doing it individually, we're recognizing, let's say, an experience, a thought, an emotion, a sensation, an action we're taking, something like that. But you're saying we can recognize it in the relationship too. Can you speak a little bit more about that label, noticing, recognizing, or expand on what you were just talking about there?
It's learning, it's understanding. And again, this is, again, in each other's care. It's much easier for us to understand each other than to just go inside. So let's say in a secure functioning relationship of equals, and let's do the ideal. The ideal is the two of us, you and I, are coming together as equals, shared power, shared authority, right? Both generals, unless we agree otherwise, right? It can be anything we decide, but this is voluntary. And we have to make the agreement declarative so we know what we're doing, right? But let's say, all things being equal, we decide we're two generals, two leaders, two bosses. Therefore, we have to come up with social contracts that give us a way to find where we're going, because if we're not pointing in the same direction, we'll fight. If we don't, we have to understand that relationships don't exist in the physical world. This is an invention, right? We invent them. And so, but how many couples are inventing their own relationship? Probably slim to none. Couples just don't think this way. But you can be sure they have ideas about how it should be. If they aren't aligned, they will fight. So, first of all, why we're together, why we are, is central to getting along. What's the point of us? Who or what do we serve? It cannot be about love, because feelings is what gets us into trouble mostly if we don't know what we're doing. So that's the first in understanding how primitive we can be by setting the bar higher, setting up purpose-centered principles that keep us from harming each other or harming the union, but also make us do things that would be better than we would do otherwise, right? The average human primate is good on a good day, maybe not so much on a bad day, right? So we plan for our devils. We're not naive. We understand how the mind works. We understand how people are. We don't assume anything. And so we're able to predict what could go wrong, right? That's the other function of the human brain that no other mammal that we know of can do. We can predict based on the past, the future. We can plan
and predict. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is essential for overriding these primitive circuits, subcortical circuits, that when triggered, I don't give a damn about you. And we know it's as simple as a little bit of corticosteroids in the brain that change the brain in such a way that we lose our empathy, we lose the ability or the caring to put ourselves in another person's shoes. That's because we're threatened. Mm-hmm. And so to know this is going to happen is power. Therefore, like performers who have to prepare not only for when they're practicing to do what they do, but the going live, right? Going live is the wild card. When we're nervous, when we're being too self-conscious, what could go wrong if we're physically performing something, or even just, actors, comedians, you name it. If they're not prepared to go live, they will be thwarted by these systems that will interfere with their body movements and so on, and they will mess up. So same with a couple. You and I know that when we go to our parents for a family dinner, end up fighting or end up having a problem. And yet we never put something in place for the next time to predict, plan, and prepare how we're going to protect each other in that situation. How are we going to manage drunk Uncle Bob? How are we going to do this? Couples don't do it. Couples walk into the same situations without ever predicting each other.
Yeah, I would argue that individuals don't do it, and it's even another step for couples to do it.
Yes.
On top of it, and the way I understand this model, which I love, this, you say everything is kind of memory,
Memory.
It's got a memory. And if you're planning, if you're as a couple, if you're putting things together and planning, how are we going to handle Uncle Bob when we're at dinner together, or when our
harming him
kids, without harming him, when our kids do this, how are we going to work with that? By planning, you're actually creating a memory.
Yes.
To draw upon.
Yes.
In the future. Why when things are, planning can be really helpful. Give us an example, I think, of, because what I love, and for those who don't know, Stan, like years ago, I don't know, I was looking at your website, because Stan and I have known each other for a long time, and I was looking at his website, because both he and I have worked with people, individually in our own different private practices, and he works with couples, and I looked at your website, and it was like, I work with people for you have like immersion. It's more immersion. That's how you decided to work with couples. And I thought that was so cool and interesting. So give us an example of maybe a couple you worked with where you coached them to lead with these ideas that you're bringing to us right now, that supported them not escalating, or being able to prepare to not escalate into some kind of conflict that they were used to doing.
Right. And that is natural for all people. The nice thing about focusing on the human condition rather than him or her, they or them, is that this is a universal problem with our species. It's not a pathology. We might think of pathology as an amplification of what we already are capable of anyway. And so we're animals, and ever so much when we're threatened. And so the threat system operates by pattern recognition, lightning fast ways of identifying something, even though we're not differentiating it from something else. If you're surviving, you can't use critical thinking in a matter of seconds. You could be hurt. And so we act, right? That's the problem. And when we accrue more threat memory, we react faster because we're adding a larger array of threat cues by which we're picking up, right? All of this is to not be hurt, right? That's it. So we have to understand this and practice for it. So when in my clinic, we're using digital video with their permission, putting them under stressors so that they can learn how to work collaboratively and cooperatively under stress and not trigger these primitive circuits that will, once they take over, game over for now.
Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break to check in and talk about a program that's very important to me. I've been working with people for over 20 years, and in that time, what I've realized is that uncovering emotional healing, strengthening emotional health, and building resilience works best when we're learning practical skills that are evidence-based, supported by a caring community, and have access to daily guidance and support. That's why I built my emotional health coaching program. If you're someone who's ready to take your emotional health to the next level, you're tired of yo-yoing around, you want to start really making real progress, whether it's building resilience, managing stress better, or simply feeling more balanced, you can get a free consult for the program. Just click the link in the description below to schedule your session and learn how we can support you. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Learning, but you have to learn by doing. Otherwise, like anything else you're trying to learn, it doesn't get in there, and it won't be available when your state is altered, which it is when we're under threat. These are hypothalamic systems of fight or flight I'm talking about.
Right. And those are context-dependent memories, and that's why you're trying to put them in a context and give them an experience so their brain can remember it in that context.
Yes, but I'm responsible for you. You're responsible for me. This is very different. I have to be an expert on the animal I picked. And I use animal because I think it's easier to think of us that way. One of the hardest things about studying human beings is that we talk. And because we talk, we mislead. Studying animals and babies are easier because we're not encumbered by that kind of analog material, right? We can watch them in action. And so the same thing here, I have to know how you operate. I am responsible. I'm your handler in the best way. You're my handler in the best way. And we see this actually happening when lives are dependent, right? When people's lives are at stake, they suddenly do these things naturally because they depend on that person or other people to stay afloat, right? They can't afford for them to go down. They have to know what to do. Same thing here in a couple system, which I think of as a survival unit. Also, I have to know how to handle you. And if you react badly to me in this game, I'm the one that's at fault because I should have known better. I should have known who I was dealing with. I should know my audience. I should know how to talk to you. I should know how to bypass areas of vulnerability, right? And so it's a different kind of responsibility that a lot of couples don't think they should have to do, and that's the problem.
Can you give us a vignette in some way of like a couple in your clinic
Mm-hmm.
that came in, and this is how you worked with them based on everything we've been talking about, how they fall into self-referencing and self-protection, and it's hard for them to come together. Like, what did you do? What do you give us an idea of what happened in the room where it happens, as they say in Hamilton? So,
First, it's normalized because I'm this way. I'm no different than you. I can be a pain in the ass. I have to do this too. It's hard to live a purpose-centered life. In other words, set up a set of principles by which we will govern each other and operate like a culture. And these purpose-centered principles are devoid of emotion. Therefore, we're deciding in this area what would be best, what would be right, what would be good. Those are the three sort of moral things that we would be deciding on. And many of these things are going to be the right thing when it's the hardest thing to do. This is the whole gambit here, and that's hard, right? I have to do the right thing even when I hate you, even when I feel like you up, even when I feel like just leaving the house, which we agreed we don't do, based on a purpose that we both agreed was best. So first things first, I want to make sure they're organized, that they even have an idea of themselves. They know how they're casting each other. Are you equals? Is this equal power, equal authority? People don't declare that. They just go on as if it's tacit, right? They just do what they think, and usually it's from their family of origin.
We just fall into roles too. It just kind of happens.
Yeah, right. What could go wrong with that? We don't have ways of planning for our devils, so I end up betraying you. You thought, oh, that could never happen. I thought I would never do that. That's naive. So, this is a serious proposition. If you and I are entering a social contract, one that nobody else will ever do, we do it because we can, and we decide the alternative is not good. Like, we're going to protect each other at all times, no matter what. We're going to be the most important people in this room and in every room, because everyone and everything depends on us being happy and working well together. Otherwise, everyone suffers, including our kids. So this is an idea, an invention. It's an ordering. It's a structure. It is shaped by you and I. And the reality is, we're responsible for the relationship, this thing we co-created. If one of us doesn't like it, it's a design problem. But we don't think that. I think it's a you problem, right? You think it's a me problem. And we don't actually see it for what it could be. And that is, this is something we shape, not our parents. So that first and foremost has to be there, because the central reason I think relationships of these kind go down, like any other relationship or union, is a failure to understand why we're even doing this. What's the point? Where do we fall? What's the hierarchy? What's most important? How are we going to make decisions when we are in a panic? Are we going to betray each other, or do we hold together? This is all thought. And again, couples usually don't think they should have to do this. It's a very different system than all other systems.
For couples stuck in like a cycle of resentment, so I'm sure you see this quite a lot. What's the first thing they can do you think, to start shifting towards more secure connection?
Repair. Repair is one of the single most, critical things in terms of whether families stay together and are harmonious, and whether couples or any union. I have to know how to fall and when to fall on my sword fully, because I'm putting the relationship aside before being right. And that's our tendency, is to want to be right. We want to be right in our communication, which we know is faulty. Incredibly faulty. We're mostly misunderstanding each other much of the time, and that can be proven. We believe our memory is correct, and that's not true. Our memory is awful. Even the recording of memory is circumspect, depending on our state of mind. And we think our perceptions are accurate, and perception is driven by state of mind. Mm-hmm. So we can't know that we're right, and yet we're willing to die on that hill, and we suffer. Relationships, we go to war because of this.
What do you say to people who say, I just feel right? I feel like Like I got like this is how things are happening. Like
Yeah, I don't care what you
you're like
feel.
this with me.
I don't care what you feel. If you're in a union of equals, soldier, you step up. Nobody cares. We care about your behavior right now, and your behavior is not pro relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so get with the program. The lovely thing about seeing it this way is it helps people not have to organize around who they think they were. Your trauma, your alcoholism, what your deficits you think you have matter not, right? This is not that kind of gig. This is about what we're going to do that we agree, what we will never do, so say the two of us. Therefore, we have to meet the standard. Therefore, we grow up. We have to grow up, right? So secure functioning requires that I am able to tolerate pain without acting it out, first and foremost. I'm able to recognize losses and grieve them. Otherwise, I will be angry forever due to injustice, right? I have to be able to accept differences. You're not me. You'll never be me, right? You're different. And if we accept that, that's our superpower, is our differences, right? We're not supposed to be the same. Probably would commit murder if we were the same, murder suicide. And I have to be able to play as a two-person psychological system of we and us, like binding legs in a three-legged race. If I were to bind legs for a month, everyone would know exactly what I'm talking about. You couldn't move without each other's agreement and permission. Otherwise, you don't go anywhere.
That's it.
That's this.
That's a really cool visual.
Yeah.
That you have.
Unfortunately, there's no physical reminder with couples.
There's not. You can separate people. That's what happens. They just separate into their places. They separate into their phones. They separate into their physical, to work, to different places that they can just, get very good at just not making contact anymore.
Yes. So secure functioning, Elijah, aspires to be at a higher level of social emotional intelligence, a higher level of personal moral development, because a lot of this falls in the area of morality, personal morality and ethics. But we have to rise to a level of being able to do the right thing when it's the hardest. This goes back to the marshmallow test for age 4, when they're testing that very area of the brain that is at fault here. This is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the do the right thing when it's the hardest executive. And so that takes discipline, that takes character, that takes aspiring to something better than the average human ape. And that is, we have to come together based on set of purposes that we both agree is great or necessary to survive. Therefore, we're both stewards of that union and protecting it at all costs, because that's our invention and it protects us. So it's a different idea. It's a different way of thinking. And this idea has been around forever. It's not new. None of it's new. It's just couples don't think they should have to do it.
What I'm hearing and what you're saying is actually a lot, and you can let me know if I have this right, but there's a lot of personal work in this, because you say, I have to be able to manage pain without reacting. I have to be able to, notice that we're different and accept the reality of that. So that's some deep personal work of personal awareness and practice. So how do you manage that in your work when you're working with couples?
All of that's managed by agreement. So you and I start a dance troupe, right? And everyone's on board because they like the purpose, they like the mission, they like what they're going to get. We're going to win, right? We're going to succeed some way, right? And then someone is acting out their emotions and they're difficult. They're storming out of a rehearsal. Well, they get fired because they're interfering with the team. This is team think, right? So that's a one-person system. That person who is acting out, they're doing so for themselves without any regard to the team itself, to the purpose, right? So they'll just be fired. You do that in the Army, you're in the brig. Do that, cop car partners, you're decommissioned. In any other world, there are consequences for bad behavior that are not pro-social, right? Same thing can be, and I think should be, in the couple system. That this isn't a matter of whether it's easy or not. This must happen. Otherwise, it's curtains for us, right? We could not exist if either of us behaved in a way that would make it impossible to work collaboratively. So therein lies not the deep work, but the forcing us to have to comply or to deal with the rules that we agree to, all you have to do is come through. That's secure functioning. That's governance. We agree we're going to do this. We believe it's the best thing. We selfishly buy into it, because if I don't selfishly buy into it, I will not do it when I least want to. And so we believe in something that's greater than what we would ordinarily think, right? And we're going to rise to the occasion. And we give each other permission to enforce, which means we have to. Right? If I'm not doing what I said, you get to tell me you can't do that. I can't, you can't, so do it. And I, by agreement, have to go, okay, sorry. That's governance. That's permission. That's two people, different people working well together, and will actually create things together, will solve problems, will make decisions without getting into a land war every time.
Yeah. I hear this this model kind of coming to mind as you're speaking, like with couples, they need to know like what their mutual purpose is as a couple, and then I'm also hearing the individual need to understand why. What are the reasons?
Why would I do that?
Yeah, because that drives our implicit, or why drives our implicit decision making.
Here's an example. Why be monogamous? There's no mandate to be monogamous with our species, right? Why do that? What's the point of that? Why would I want to give up all the other things I could be doing for just this one person? If I can't articulate why that would be selfishly good for me, do you think I'm going to come through time as we move through time and the conditions change and the wind blows in a different direction? Can I be reliable in that sense? Probably not, right? Because we know human primates are inherently selfish, self-centered, exploitive, opportunistic, easily influenced by groups, xenophobic, and therefore racist, right? That's who we are. And it would be naive to think that we would do those things unless there was a gun to our head, right?
That would be a strong why.
That would be a strong why. That's might is right. That's dictatorship. Right. That's authoritarianism. But that is not what I would imagine couples would want in their system. And so we're talking about, again, our ability to make shit up and manifest that idea. Right? These are all ideas. Relationship is an idea, and mostly handed down from our culture and our family history, books, and from fairy tales and rhymes. We have an imagining of love relationships. We just don't have a uniform imagining of it. Everyone's different in their expectations, plus their entitlements from their families of origin, plus the injustices and unfairness they had to deal with at the hands of their family system. That carries forward. And the sins of the parents are often laid at the foot of the partner.
And whatever traumas they had growing up can make them more self-protecting. Right. And it's if they don't have an awareness of that, or the partner doesn't have an awareness of that, then it seems like a rejection. There's a couple comes together. One has abandonment issues. The other one has, some form of trauma. So that person oftentimes retreats. That person perceives it as abandonment. And, that system then erupts, and then unless they come and see you or someone over there. Yeah.
And so here's the problem. Individual therapy has the luxury, and should, and the purpose of exploring, if I go into it, therapy, to explore my mind. I'm hiring you to help me as an auxiliary brain to study myself, like a college course. And that could take a long time before any behavior changes. Couples don't have that time. Mm-hmm. Couples don't have the time to figure out why they're burning the house down. They're burning the house down. And we need a system that stops that from happening first. And that system basically can only be measured in behavior that is either just pro-self or just pro-relationship. Both are hazardous, right? And not both at the same time, right? That kind of behavior will just destroy what we create, period. That's what's going to happen. And that's what always happens, right? Our nature is what destroys relationship. If we are to destroy relationship, it's our nature. Therefore, we have to have a better set of principles to operate by. Otherwise, we do damage naturally, just naturally. This is the case with all of us, right? That's why some of our language was formulated formality-wise to not confuse an insult, right? Because I challenge you to a duel to the death, right? That's how sensitive we are. and how easily we go to war, right? And so we already live by certain ideas that contain our beasts, that contain our passions and our wish to do whatever we want when we want to, right? Just like kids, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds are basically the off the line factory human primate. That's us, but they have not been socialized yet. They have not been taught how to get along with other people. That's part of the petri dish of parenting, right? Of family. We're preparing you for the world out there that's going to be a lot harsher than us, but we're preparing you to be a human being. And that takes being able to control yourself, being able to hold and wait, being able to appreciate someone who is different than you, be able to tolerate someone who's higher up than you, even though you don't like them. All these things that are necessary for societies to run, for civilization to operate, for people to get along. The same thing has to be there for couples. And it's
this is just like coming together for me, because if a lot of the things you're talking about, this is what we need to be able to do individually and as couples, the things you're describing is a lot of what's encapsulated in emotional health. Like, I need to be able to take care of my emotions, know what's there, to be able to regulate, to know the differences between me and another, to be able to create acceptance. One of the most powerful things I saw you kind of showcase, I think probably on a stage at one of the interpersonal neurobiology conferences at UCLA or other places, was this idea of co-regulation, and how dysregulation is implicit within us, and how you had two people, or this is what you were describing, like stand in a room and then like take a step toward each other one by one, so they could notice the reactivity that was implicit in their nervous system, unaware typically. That's the subcortical thing you're talking about. And can you speak to that? And then the second thing I'm just going to ask you to speak to, because which is so powerful, which I ended up using in my life because you had said it, was this ability of making contact in an embrace or a hug until both nervous systems, until your body relaxes. And right, which is such a cool thing, because you take a somatic approach to that. So can you speak to that? Yeah.
Yeah, all of that is actually based on neurobiology, all of it. Mm-hmm. The toward and away exercise, which I still do, it was part of my research, is to detect attachment on a physical level, not on a verbal linguistic level. So that the idea here is that a moving object moving toward, being static, and then moving away, being static, and then leaving, replicates a lot of other tests, a lot of other instruments, including the strange situation. But it also reveals on a very micro level, if the therapist is trained to notice the slightest changes in the face, voice, body movements, all of it, to track the reflexes that really show the attachment system in action, right? These are moving and still objects moving toward in a way that are more reliable, I find, and easily to detect through frame analysis, digital frame analysis, than any other test. So that helps me understand and helps me help them understand by viewing it. What is basically there that is protective, that has, and is often confused with love, and it's not, just plain reflex, safety and security. This is our bodies operating as they would in everyday life, but also especially with a primary attachment figure, right? And it's a very reliable test, very reliable for showing disorganization as well. So there's that, but the when you say about co-regulation is beset by errors always. There is no such as constant thing as constant attunement. We're constantly misattuning to each other, but in fractions of seconds, right? And if we're good at it with each other, we error correct without even knowing. There are error correcting parts of the brain that do that. But if we have a sustained moment where we're not co-regulating properly, and we have this sustained misattuned moment, we experience anxiety and threat. This will happen right away. And that is, if you were thinking of dating somebody and you went out on a date and you had too many misattuned moments, you would never see that person again, right? They make you too uncomfortable. They make you feel too awkward. It feels wrong. Right? It just feels wrong. And so that system is really highly acute, very acute. It depends on the brain you have, because some people are more able to pick up misattunement than others. But we do so on a subcortical level. That is a problem because when we're dealing with us getting along, a lot of it has to do with our ability to co-regulate exciting states, pleasurable states, but even more importantly, being able to co-regulate properly distress states, because that's where we do the most harm to ourselves and others. And that is, some people are just good at that, partners. There's still a threshold by which they will revert to a one-person system, though, if they're not skilled.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If you're dysregulated in a, let's say just in the kitchen together, you're standing two people in the kitchen and one person, and then you don't have this self-awareness. The way I understood that, Stan, was that if, first of all, your dysregulation will influence your perception and decision making and what you do, and if you can't be aware of that and be able to release a little bit and refocus on maybe understanding or caring about what the other person is talking about or where they're coming from, trying to put yourself in their shoes, it's going to be difficult to make that connection. But that's
where I come in, though. That's where me as your partner comes in.
Yeah.
Because that's where I step in. If you could, you would. You can't. So I'm there. I know how to get you out of that state. We're both meditators, so we deal with states, right? State of mind is everything. State of body, state of mind. This is everything, basically, in this world of relationship, are being able to acclimate or to regulate certain states, right? That either throw us off, throw us into shame, we can't get out of, make us furious, make us run away, whatever. These are unregulated or dysregulated states, and that's causing the trouble mostly. So a lot of this is state regulation, but also planning, predicting these things happen. How will I deal with this the next time? That would be more effective with this person that I pick, right? Who's different than me.
That's a huge point. You're kind of looping that back to like, hey, let's put an exclamation point on this. Yeah. This idea that couples, hey, waving the flag, you need to do this planning and preparing because you're going to dysregulate. This stuff's going to happen. So you got to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially not only can it happen, but when it does happen, you're supposed to do a postmortem and put something in place to prevent repetition, but nobody does that either. And so they don't do it with their kids. Kids are highly predictable, but they don't predict them, and they've run into the same trouble. Once the threat system engages and will engage like a fire that's spreading, people are fully automatic. What they're saying, it means nothing. It's garbage. It is all memory-based, reflexive, and meant to protect thyself, period. And once that happens, we're in a loop. That's what repeats. And so the second thing, Elijah, you were referring to that I didn't speak to, sorry. The other problem is the manner in which we will interact when one or both of us is under stress. That is the ghost in the machine. That's the problem for all of us, period, full stop. It's not the subject. It's always the manner in which we are interacting under stress, which basically the topic is a stressor. That repeats, and I can prove that. That just repeats because we're insensitive. We're not able to maintain a two-person psychological stance under stress. And so we present in ways that are good for me, but not good for you. And that's the central mistake that we are prone to make, all of us prone to make.
Let me make an exclamation point here for everyone as well. So and just to pull back something you said a few minutes ago when I was talking about, two people in the kitchen and, if you're dysregulated, you said something about like, it doesn't even need to, well, this is what I understood it. It doesn't even need to be the both of you in that moment. One person understands that this person is, for lack of better words, their emotional reservoir is like overflowing, and you can be that person if you understand that. To hold the purpose of the couple that we're in this together. I'm here to support you, right?
I have to know exactly what to do because talking too much isn't going to work because that person doesn't have resources for language. So I have to know exactly what to do. That I'm practiced. I'm prepared. I already know trial and error. I do this and I get killed. I do that and the person relaxes and sees me again as a friendly. They see me right now as a predator.
That's a good. I'm aware of our time, and I want to respect the time too. And
stuff, isn't it?
It's really good stuff. We could go. I could. Of course, you run 7 day. You run whole 7 day retreats on this stuff. So
I'm thinking about this constantly. And part of the reason, Elijah, is I'm scared shitless about our country and about life and about the human condition, period. That a lot of this comes out of my own wanting solace, wanting to figure things out and to feel safe in the world. And by understanding more and more about our brain and the human condition, it gives me comfort to know at least I can do something in my relationship, in my family, with my friends, with my students, and so on, even though I can see how easily I could do the same thing that everyone else is doing right now, bifurcating, otherizing, being defensive, being intolerant, tribal, all the things I'm capable of as well.
Especially because we're cued and triggered on a consistent basis or under threat.
Automatic, you don't have control of that unless you.
Yeah, and I always said this, Stan, you appreciate this maybe, but I always thought like before you get a phone and go into social media or media in general, there should be like, just like you'd get a license to drive. You need to have a license for this stuff to prepare and to be aware of how you're cued and triggered and manipulated, on a subcortical level to this threat, to fall into this threat protection space. And I thought that would be a wise thing to do.
We don't even understand how our mind is constantly messing with us. We believe everything our mind says. Like Stephen Levine said, I think it's a radio stuck on. That's noise. A lot of it's noise. A lot of it's doing its job, but we're not supposed to listen to some of these things. Yet we do. And so growing up, I think, is also understanding how the mind operates and how it's not necessarily personal, that it is doing its job, but often at the wrong time. And we're listening to it too much. That's meditation. That's where we're watching our mind. We're watching how it works, how sensations work, how feelings work, right? The problem is going live. The problem is even experienced meditators, they're really good at managing states until they get with another person and they go live and they go.
And that's part of the preparing.
Yeah, because people are
that type of work. Yeah. If you had like a magic wand, you can give couples maybe one tool to be able to begin to start improving their relationships, what would it be?
I still have to go with define why you even exist. It cannot be for your kids. Kids depend on you being happy. They're going to do what they see. Not because of love. We do terrible things in the name of love. If we're just operating by feelings alone, good luck. Organize, decide, create this thing that you started but you didn't finish. It's a creation between two people. Take responsibility for the creation that's in your heads, right? Just make it explicit. Maybe you'll find out you're actually not on the same page with big ticket items. That's not bad. It's painful, but that's fair, right? But a lot of people don't even know the deal breakers that might be lurking there. I never want what you want. Well, that's not going to be a good life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Thank you for taking the time out with us. For everyone who's watching and listening, there's obviously such a deep well and depth of experience and knowledge and understanding really how relationships work and what we need. And so I'm appreciative of you. I hope to do this again with you, and we can even go deeper as well.
Yeah.
But just to let everyone know, your book, In Each Other's Care, also the second edition of Wired for Love, are incredible reads for anyone who wants to go deeper into this and really start integrating it a bit more in their life. But where can people, let us know where people can find you, what you have regularly going on, what's the best way to dive deeper into your work?
Everything that you want to know about either being trained as a mental health professional or to be in any of our couple workshops or retreats, it would be Stan, first name, at thepactinstitute.com, pactinstitute.com. And also that's the website where you can get all the information you need.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stan. Thank you so much. To everyone listening, have a wonderful day. Take these, feel free to watch, rewatch, listen, re-listen, and we look forward to supporting your emotional health for the long run. Thank you, Stan.
Be well.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought-provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.